Layer 1 is by far the most frustrating and testing layer of the 5, and therefore will be either the making or the breaking of your adventures into the world of lucid dreaming. If you're an experienced aeronaut, then Layer 1 experiences are more disappointing than frustrating. However, if you're just starting out, then they can end up being really demoralising. However, if you stick with it and decide to not give up, then you're literally just around the corner from full-fledged lucidity. And that's where the real fun begins. So just as before, this layer has 2 variations, and I'm going to explain to you now. Okay, so first off we have Layer 1 Minor. This is when you realise you're dreaming, but then wake yourself up from the dream within seconds of becoming lucid. This can happen for numerous reasons, but it's usually down to simply getting overexcited. Excitement and lucid dreams don't bode well together, as you'll realise the more and more you practice. And if you want to scale the higher layers and have long stretches of higher layer lucidity, then you must learn how to control that excitement. You know, don't get me wrong, you can still feel excited in a lucid dream, but it's all about how much attention you pay that excitement and making sure that that isn't what you're primarily focusing on. So anyway, I'm sure you can all relate to a Layer 1 Minor experience. We've all had them after all. But I'm going to give you a real quick example of one anyway. So one night I was on some sort of guided tour of our solar system, and my guide was someone quite clearly indigenous to a planet other than our own, and he was quite reminiscent of the light beings I've often conversed with in waking reality, but that's another story for another time. So after traversing the solar system for a while, my guide informed me, to my surprise, that I was in fact dreaming. Due to the initial shock of being told this, combined with the excitement that shortly followed, the surroundings started to dissipate very quickly, and cracks and glitches started to appear all around the dream world. And within less than half a minute I'd woken myself back up and was back in my bed at home. A quick thing I'd like to point out here is how it was a dream character that induced my lucidity in this particular experience. This is definitely something to keep an eye out for. It can often transpire that it's others in the dream that bring you to full awareness, and not always just yourself. Although, of course, you could argue that those characters are just another facet of yourself anyway, so in fact either way it's you that creates the opportunity for lucidity. But either way, it's really interesting to look out for these slight variations. Another thing I want to point out quickly is that even though for those few seconds I was aware that I was dreaming, I didn't properly break through. Properly breaking through can take quite a few minutes, so it's not something that will often happen during a Layer 1 experience. I've alluded to this whole breaking through thing quite a few times now, but don't worry, I'll be going into it in more depth in the Layer 2 video, as this is the layer where it begins to occur more frequently. Okay, so another aspect of Layer 1 Minor is when you become lucid, but then you choose to wake yourself up from the dream. There's one common reason for this occurring, and that is, yep, you guessed it, nightmares. For example, often in the past, I've been experiencing the most horrific nightmare, but then something will prompt me to realise that it's just a dream. But instead of, taking control of the dream and breaking through, as I say, I decide instead in my panic state to simply wake myself up. This is similar to what I was talking about in my Layer 0 video, about being able to wake myself up from nightmares as a child. It's similar to that, but not exactly the same. The major difference here is that one would be fully aware that it was just a nightmare. It wouldn't be an inkling, it would be a full-fledged certainty. And also, the decision to wake yourself up from the nightmare would be a lot more consciously calculated. However, as you become more and more skilled as an aeronaut, you should learn to never wake yourself up if you become lucid during a nightmare. The reason being is that often nightmares are your subconscious mind's way of passing on a message of some sort. So embrace these opportunities when they arise, and confront whatever's been tormenting you within the dream. It can be a very rewarding feeling when you turn a nightmare back into a pleasant dream. Okay, so secondly we have layer 1 major. This is when you realise you're dreaming, but within a minute or two you have a false awakening and carry on the dream non-lucid. A false awakening, for anyone that isn't sure, is when you dream that you've woken up, whereas in fact you're continuing on with the dream. So for example, I once dreamt that I was at the top of a very tall building, looking down over the edge. At this point in the dream I was layer 0 major, as I had a vague sort of inkling that something didn't feel quite right, but I wasn't quite yet at the point of realisation where I could break through into layer 2 or higher. I then decided, as I was looking down from the top of the building, that I'd jump off it and attempt to fly. This perfectly illustrates what I was talking about in my previous video about how you have no sense of consequence in a layer 0 major dream. So in mid-flight, lucidity began to properly kick in and my rational mind began to put 2 and 2 together. I eventually came to the conclusion that if I was flying, then I was most certainly dreaming, and so I began to rise through the layers. But before I could even get a proper grasp on what was going on and stabilise the scene, the dream began to fade due to the exhilaration I was feeling from the flying, and within seconds I'd woken up and was back in my bed at home. At least I thought I was back in my bed at home. Whereas in fact I had simply made a scene transition and was still very much within the dream world. However, from this point on the dream carried on in a fairly mundane fashion and I was totally non-lucid. A great way to combat this is to get into the habit of performing a reality check every time you wake up. Get used to doing this, and then when these kind of experiences arise, you'll be able to quash them and continue on your journey to the higher layers. Another slight variation of this layer is when you become lucid, but within seconds the dream begins to fade to the black. After a while of being in the black, the dream reassembles around you and you re-enter. However, when you re-enter this time, you will be totally non-lucid. The black, for anyone that isn't sure, is a term I've coined that is the in-between state of being awake and being asleep. You're not quite one or the other, and you're still seeing very distinct colours and shapes and possibly even flashes of images within your mind's eye. This is similar, although not exactly the same, to the hypnagogic imagery we experience whilst falling to sleep and the hypnopomic imagery we experience whilst waking up. So there we have it, that's layer 1 for you. As I've mentioned before, I'm on a constant search for more intricacies and subtle differences within each layer, so please don't hesitate to either comment me or send me a message if you discover more yourself. Okay, so cheers for watching everyone, and the next video is going to be going into layer 2 minor and layer 2 major. This is the layer where the real fun begins, so make sure you tune back and check it out. Alright then, catch you later.